All right, there are many issues we could discuss on the ethics of preaching, but I want to talk about one of the subjects that comes to mind first, and that is plagiarism. There are more exciting topics to talk about with regard to preaching, but this is an important issue. It's also a very complex issue. After all, the author of Ecclesiastes said there's nothing new under the sun. Which means that we're going to be repeating some things, going to be turning over some old material. One person quipped one time, the ancients have stolen our best ideas. And if you preached for any length of time, you will probably admit some failure in this area. And so how can we avoid plagiarism? How can we avoid the problems related to this complex issue? First thing I want to point out is that this is not a new problem. Jeremiah, in Jeremiah 23, rebuked the prophets for stealing words from one another. It's also not a problem, exclusively focused on preaching. There have been through the years accusations of plagiarism in art, in entertainment, in journalism. Students have confessed to plagiarism. Professors have found students plagiarizing forever and ever. Raymond Bailey said that King James found plagiarism to be so widespread in Elizabethan England that he issued a decree that every preacher should deliver at least one original sermon per month. So he's like, can I just get one original sermon, guys? During Spurgeon's day, there was a little limerick that was floating around that went like this. There was a preacher named Spurgie, no lover he of liturgy. His sermons are fine. I use them as mine, as do most of the clergy. So this is not a new topic that we're dealing with here. Now, why is it a particular problem in preaching? Well, one is that we feel the pressure of delivering content every single week. We have a deadline every week, and we can't walk up on a Sunday and say, hey guys, can I have 2 more days? May I have an extension, the way students often do in class. We feel this pressure of time. Sunday is always coming. And we feel the pressure of being orthodox in our teaching. And that's kind of what makes this a tricky one with preaching, because there's a sense in which we should not be original, meaning that we're not creating new doctrine. When we feel this tension of wanting to say what our spiritual fathers have said. And so sometimes the question arises in our minds, is this plagiarism or is this multiplication? And some through the years have even been fine with repeating sermons. Augustine used to say that if a preacher wasn't great, they should preach the sermons of others. Luther was also fine as long as the preacher was at least dealing with the text himself. He was fine with them preaching his sermons. So again, this is not a new subject, it's a complex subject. The question is here, what is plagiarism? And the word itself is a Latin word that it comes from the Latin word meaning kidnapper or pirate. And that's what it is when you're plagiarizing, is that you are a sermon pirate. You have kidnapped someone else's material that is not your own, and so there is deceit at work. And so it's a real heart problem. And I think that's important to think about the heart, because you could split hair over a lot of the rules as to what is and what isn't plagiarism in preaching, because after all, it's not even a written event, it's an oral event. And so if you use an illustration from a magazine article, but you got that idea from another preacher, who do you cite, the article or the preacher? If you use one of a guy's 3 points in a sermon, do you need to cite the fact that you used one of his points or one of his headings? Many other scenarios could work, or you could think of, and you'll need to work through that in your own context with other people. So it's easy to focus on sort of how far is too far, as Scott Gibson says. And the question that I would pose are questions like, why are you doing this? Is there deceit? Are you willingly stealing from another? Are you being responsible with your time, with your energy, and with your gifts? The old preaching prof John Broadus offered a good rule of thumb when he says, it is a good rule never to make use of another's contribution in a way that would be embarrassing to confess in public, or that would be embarrassing if the author were present. And so that's something that you might think about as you start thinking about avoiding this. We should avoid the extremes of just saying, I'm not going to listen to preaching. There might be a time in which you need to do that. Or I'm not going to read any books, or I'm not going to talk to anyone. We can't do that, right? We're a product of our times. And so let me just hit on 6 issues as you think about this that you might want to discuss with others. The first would be honesty. We have to put deceit to death. We have to be people of integrity. We have to remember, as Paul says, we preach in the sight of God. So don't make someone else's story your story when it didn't happen to you. That's just straight up lying. I know cases of guys preaching not just a guy's sermon, but entire series of sermons. And so there's obviously problems. There's obviously heart issues that need to be addressed there. So honesty. Secondly, synthesis. One of the things that you have to do in preaching is learn how to read a lot, draw a lot, but then synthesize material. Put it in your own words for your own audience. You don't want a sermon to be just a string of quotations. That would be tedious and very uninteresting. You have to learn how to gather information, synthesize it, communicate it concisely and in a way that sounds like yourself, in a way that communicates to your particular audience. Because you could go this other route of, I don't want to plagiarize, and so all I'm doing is quoting people throughout the sermon. Thirdly, I would encourage you to give shout-outs. It's fine to express appreciation for people that you're learning from, to even tell your congregation, these are my main sources, or to say something along the lines of, I benefited from this person's writing throughout this series of sermons. You may even write a blog or put it in the newsletter, some of the key sources that you're using. Fourthly, attribution. This is where there's a good bit of disagreement because the sermon is not a scholarly paper. It's an oral presentation. And you don't want to come across being too academic. And so it's okay to keep it casual and to keep it brief. To say, someone has said, or one scholar has said, it has been said, a minister said, the story is told. And even say, I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it illustrates a point. Even the biblical writers say things like, it has been said somewhere. And this takes nothing away from your sermon to do that. Sometimes you may want to quote them precisely because you want them to know about this person or to know about their books or their resources. If you're citing substantive material, then you definitely, I think, want to give credit to that. If someone's poured time and energy and resource into work and you've benefited from it, then give them credit for that. Never preach another sermon verbatim. Unless you tell your church, maybe it's a Wednesday night or something, you haven't had time to prepare, and you say, I'm going to read you a commentary that I think is really good and edifying, and we're going to stop along the way and discuss it. That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about just taking someone else's sermon and preaching it verbatim. That would obviously be wrong. Fifth, confidence. Why is it that people plagiarize? I think this is a big part of it. You need confidence. You need confidence in the gospel. You need confidence in who you are. You need to grow in confidence as you preach. You need to walk in community. That will give you confidence as you preach. You need to put to death the love of the praise of others. And remember to preach to an audience of one with a full heart. And to just get up and believe that the Scripture is sufficient to change lives, that the Spirit has empowered you to preach, and realize you don't have to commit the sin of plagiarism. You can stand up as a person redeemed, washed in the blood, and stand up and preach the Word, believing that the gospel is the power of God into salvation. Finally, do hard work. Preaching is hard work. And if you're not willing to do hard work, you need to get out. Paul says in 1 Timothy 5 that those who labor in preaching and teaching are worthy of double honor. It's labor. It's intensity. It's a labor of love for me. It's a labor of love for many who preach. But a lot of people fall into plagiarism simply because they're too lazy to put in the work. And that, of course, is a problem, something that must be put to death. It has been said that the call to preach is a call to study. And if we're not willing to put in the hard work of study, then there's a deeper problem. The good news is we have power to do this hard work. As Paul said to the Colossians, "For this I toil, struggling with all his energy, that he powerfully works within me." It is work, but we have his power. And may God grant us power to be faithful to his word.